بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين، فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون، والذين هم لأماناتهم وعهدهم راعون والذين هم على صلواتهم يحافظون. أولئك هم الوارثون الذين يرثون الفردوس هم فيها خالدون. ولقد خلقنا الإنسان من سلالة من طين ثم جعلناه نطفة في قرار مكين، ثم خلقنا النطفة علقة فخلقنا العلقة مضغة فخلقنا المضغة عظاما فكسونا العظام لحما ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. ثم إنكم بعد ذلك لميتون ثم إنكم يوم القيامة تبعثون. ولقد خلقنا فوقكم 7 طرائق وما كنا عن الخلق غافلين، وأنزلنا من السماء ماء بقدر فأسكناه في الأرض وإنا على ذهاب به لقادرون. فأنشأنا لكم به جنات من نخيل وأعناب لكم فيها فواكه كثيرة ومنها تأكلون، وشجرة تخرج من طور سيناء تنبت بالدهن وصبغ للآكلين. وإن لكم في الأنعام لعبرة نسقيكم مما في بطونها ولكم فيها منافع كثيرة ومنها تأكلون، وعليها وعلى الفلك تحملون. ولقد أرسلنا نوحا إلى قومه فقال يا قوم اعبدوا الله ما لكم من إله غيره أفلا تتقون. فقال الملأ الذين كفروا من قومه ما هذا إلا بشر مثلكم يريد أن يتفضل عليكم ولو شاء الله لأنزل ملائكة ما سمعنا بهذا في آبائنا الأولين إن هو إلا رجل به جنة فتربصوا به حتى حين. قال رب انصرني بما كذبون. فأوحينا إليه أن اصنع الفلك بأعيننا ووحينا فإذا جاء أمرنا وفارت النور فاسلك فيها من كل زوجين 2 وأهلك إلا من سبق عليه القول منهم ولا تخاطبني في الذين ظلموا إنهم مغرقون. فإذا استويت أنت ومن معك على الفلك فقل الحمد لله الذي نجانا من القوم الظالمين وقل رب أنزلني منزلا مباركا وأنت خير المنزلين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Jazakumullah khair, Brother Abdurrahim. Thank you for the Quran. With the salawat, please invite Shaykh to the member. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين. الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. اللهم صل على فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها وسر المستودع فيها. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. صدق الله علي العظيم. ولا نريد منكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات. First and foremost, I give my condolences to the Imam of our time, Imam Zaman Ajal Faraj al-Sharif, for the Shahadat of Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha, that we are in the days of mourning Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha. And then I give my condolences to the Zaidi family for their loss, as we are also commemorating the death or Shahadat anniversary of Shaheed Mohammed Sayedain Zaidi. And it is a good time to, again, to focus on Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha, again, the mother of the Imma alayhim afdal salatu wasalam, mother of the Sadat. And as we focus on her briefly tonight, because I know tonight is a work night and many people have to get back to work, I just want to point out one aspect about the life of Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha. It is a very important aspect of her life. Of course, we started with the verse 8 and 9 of Surah Al-Dahr or Surah Al-Insan, which we're all familiar with, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about that moment in which Imam Hassan and Hussein, they were ill, and then Fatima Zahra, the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim afdal wasalam, they made an oath, another to fast once these two Imams, as young boys, they receive cure. And when we look at it from one perspective, yes, it is a fadila, it is a moment which elevates the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wasalam. But it's actually more than that when we truly pay attention to that event and what occurred in that event. It is mainly as well a lesson for us. And why do I say this? On one hand, I say this because when we look at every riwayah that explains what happened, what went on, that we see that among those individuals who also made the vow to fast was someone that we don't categorize them within our theological framework as being ma'asum or ma'asuma. And this was Fidda, salamullah alayha. That she was among those, the Ahlul Bayt. She was among Imam Ali alayhi salatu, Fatima Zahra, even Imam Hassan Hussein. They themselves, at that young age, they also vowed that we will fast too, and they fasted. But also Fidda, salamullah alayha. And it's very important to understand this and to understand the effects, because when we want to, sometimes when we want to see also the kind of the greatness of someone, especially someone who is an educator or a teacher, they say, oh, look at that person's students. And when you see those students that they elevated, you know that, well, those individuals or whoever taught them gave them a very solid foundation, gave them a very solid education and understanding. And this is something that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he also points to one of the riwayat, one of the hadith that comes in the tafsir Ali ibn Ibrahim Qumi, where Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he says that Shi'atuna or atfalu Shi'atina min al-mu'mineen. He says, the children of our Shia, that these individuals will be counted among the mu'mineen, among those who are the believers, who have iman and firm iman. And I just want to give you this example for this because I'm letting you know that, look, that moment that when the food was given and Fidda being among them, that what Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu is saying is absolutely true. And one example of that is the offspring of Fidda, salamullah alayha. Within one of the books that one of our ulama, they compiled about the mu'minat, the women who are ulama, who are urafa. Among them is the granddaughter of Fidda. That one person encountered, and when he encountered her, that he realized that this woman, that she was someone who was, she was special. And that when she made dua, and this individual, he was traveling through the desert, and he kind of lost his provision, and he's in the desert. And so he sees this woman in the desert, and he comes, he thinks that maybe she's lost too, and maybe we can go together. She says, no, I'm not lost. She says, and you've lost all of your things, your provision. She said, you know what? She made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says that now you go over behind this kind of hill, and there you will find a kind of a cloth that's there, and there's food there, there's provisions for you there. You take that and you go about your way. And this person, he went, and as he said, he saw it. He's like, what? So he goes back and he's like, who are you? Because he saw that she made this dua, and he knew that this provision for him was by the barakah of the dua of this woman. So when she described herself, she says, I am the daughter of the daughter, in other words, granddaughter of the khadim of Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayhi. From this, it was known that she was the granddaughter of Fidda, salamullah alayhi. So as Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he says that the atfalu shi'atuna min al-mu'mineen. This is just the first part of that hadith. But he explains why. He says, turabbiha Fatima alayhi salam. Subhanallah. That why are the children, the offspring of Shi'atuna, why are they among the mu'mineen? He says, why? Because they received their tarbiyah from Fatima. Turabbiha Fatima In other words, that the life of Fatima, salamullah alayha, the sirat of Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, it is something that we must pay attention to. We must learn from Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha. And as Ayatollah Jawad Amali, hafidhahullah, as he stated, he says, sometimes he says, when you look at us as Shia, he says that, and especially when it comes to the Azza, the mourning for Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, he says, you have two types or two groups that they cry for Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha. And both in their own category is good, but one is better than the other. He says some, they cry simply hearing the statement that what happened, that's how the house was set on fire, how the door was kicked in, how Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, that how she lost the young baby Muhsin. I say that from these things they cry. He says, and that has its blessings and its barakah. He says, but then there are those who they cry when they understand the lessons that Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, that she has taught us. And he uses the example of the khutbah al-fadakiyya. He says that, yeah, when you read it, some people, they just read it and they move on. And for them, what is more important is that, oh, well, hey, we have to hear that musibah, and we cry from that. But he says others, they take that lesson that Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, she left for us and she gave for to us. And from that, they understand also like the maqam of Fatima Zahra. And the more that you understand the maqam of Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, the greater you feel the loss of Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha. And just to give you one example of this, there was an individual by the name of Abdul Mun'im. He's a mustabsir. In other words, he was Sunni and then he became Shia. But what made him Shia? He says that he says, tashayya'atu bi barakati Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha. He says it was by the blessings of Fatima Zahra that he became Shia, that he began to follow the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. And he did so from reading the khutbah of Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha. He said when he read this khutbah, not even just simply reading it, he said he was studying it. He says, and then one day as he was reading, he says, it was almost like an arrow shot into his heart. And he realized, he was like, wait a minute, she's not a simple person, she's not an ordinary person. That her maqam and her status, he says, is far beyond what we can even imagine. He says, and when I first started studying it, he says, I was thinking one thing and I took the khutbah kind of simple. He said, but he kept studying it. And then he kind of realized, he was like, no, that's subhanAllah, Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, that she is not an ordinary person. Ayatollah Jawad Amli also in one of his, lectures, he also points out an aspect of the khutbah of Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, khutbah al-fadakiyya. And even just that one line, he says, if you really reflect upon it and you think about it, and even it brought him to tears. He says that when Fatima Zahra, salamullah alayha, she begins to bring the proof from the Quran about how the Anbiya, that how they inherited one from another, that how Sulaiman, he inherited from his father Dawood. And then she kept giving examples. So then she asks this question of this crowd. She says, so why do you think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put those there? Did he put those there and exclude my father? That he's, in other words, that he's not among the Anbiya? That his children would inherit from him? Then she says another line, this is what brought Ayatollah Jawad Amli to tears. He says, or is it afaza'amta? Or is it that you think, as you've ruled, and as we find in the ahkam, he says, ahlu millatan la yatawarathan. Meaning that if you have people of two different religions. So, for example, someone is a Muslim, and this is happening at the time. So the child became Muslim, and maybe their parents had become Muslim. This is in the early days of Islam. That if that child passed away, based on that shahada of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, their parents would not inherit from them. Their siblings wouldn't inherit from them if they were not among the Muslims. So that meaning that because they are of two different faiths, then they're not going to inherit from each other. So she's being very poignant about this aspect that, so what is it? That you say, my father, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that he is Muslim, he is the Nabi of Islam, and I have left the deen? He says, what are you thinking? That I do not inherit, that there is no hadhan li, la hadha li, wa la irtha li, that I have no inheritance, and there's no proportion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set forth for me. So understanding Fatima Zahra salamu alayha, taking that lesson from her, and not only that our children are trained by Fatima, turabbiha Fatima, as Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi wasallam, first and foremost, that we have to have that tarbiyah from Fatima Zahra. That we have to have that tarbiyah from Fatima Zahra. And once we gain that tarbiyah from Fatima Zahra salamu alayha, then we can pass it on to our children. And among that, the tarbiyah, and this is what I want to kind of point out here, that as verse 8 and 9 of Surah Al-Insan, that Fatima Zahra salamu alayha, again, she was the one who was preparing those meals. She was the one who was preparing those meals. And according to one of the rawayat, one of the descriptions, it says that when the miskin came, that Fatima Zahra, she gave. When the yatim came, then Imam Ali alayhi salam, he gave the order that, no, give this food to them. And when the asira came, they said, Imam Hassan and Hussein, they said, no, give the food. And they were left without food for 3 days. And though they were fasting. But when they gave from what? Ala hubbi. Hub of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the aspects that we find in the training and the tarbiyah of Fatima Zahra salamu alayha for us is to how to gain this hub of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How to gain that hub of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's very important that we gain that hub for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As one individual, he asked Rasulullah, he asked him about Yawm al-Qiyamah. He says, when would it be? And of course we know that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also states that this is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what's important is that you prepare for that. And he asked this individual, وَمَا أَعْدَدْتَ لَهَا? And what have you prepared for Yawm al-Qiyamah? Yawm al-Sa'ah, this as-Sa'ah. And so then this individual, he told Rasulullah, he says, Hubbullah wa hubbu rasuli. That what have I prepared? The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. At that point, Rasulullah, he responded to them. He says that, and if this is the case, he says, تَحْشُرَ مَعَ مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. Then you will be raised up with that individual or those who you love. In other words, you will be raised with Rasulullah. But here I would say that it is not simply that we can say, oh, well, we love Allah and we love Rasulullah, but we don't love his Ahlul Bayt. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he made it incumbent upon us. La as'alukum alaykum, told the Prophet, La as'alukum alaykum ajran illa mawaddata fil qurba. Except for love of the near ones, love of his Ahlul Bayt. But how do we gain this love of Ahlul Bayt? This love which is also described as among the best actions that we can do. As Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi wasallam, he explains when someone asks him, he says, what is the best thing that we can do? What is the best action we can do? And Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi wasallam, he explained to Fudayl, this is the individual, his companion who asks, he says, the best action that you can do that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made incumbent upon you, he says, ta'atullah wa ta'atu rasuli. So to obey Allah and to obey His Messenger. Wa hubbullah wa hubbu rasulihi wa hubbu ulil amri wa hubbu ulil amri. He says, so obey Allah and His Prophet and have love for Allah, love for His Prophet, and love for ulul amr. Love for those who, again, we know the verse, and simply for time, I'm not going to recite that the ulul amr are those individuals that we must obey. Those individuals who have the command in their hands. And who had the command in their hand after Rasulullah? Fatima Zahra sallallahu alayha. That she was the one who was calling ya'muruna bil ma'ruf wa yanhauna 'anil munkar. She was the one who was calling towards obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obedience of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So to ignore Fatima Zahra, to disobey Fatima Zahra sallallahu alayha, is taking us away, would take those individuals away from the love of Allah and love of Rasulullah. As the Prophet Allah himself, he stated, and this is something that we find in the riwayat of the Muslimin, that whoever harms Fatima, or whoever angers Fatima, angers me. Whoever angers me, angers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever harms Fatima, harms me. Whoever harms me, harms Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, one of the ways of gaining that hub of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through Fatima Zahra salamu alayha. That when even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and this is one of the connections when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, He tells the Prophet, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهِ. Tell your ummah that if you claim to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاتَّبِعُونِ يُحْبِبُكُمُ اللَّهِ. Then follow me, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will reciprocate that love. He will reciprocate that love. And so one of the best ways, to show our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to show our love for Fatima Zahra salamu alayha. And how do we show our love for Fatima Zahra salamu alayha? One of our ulama, Ahlul Ma'rifah, one who kind of traveled that spiritual path, he stated this in his very beautiful statement. He says that if you want to really understand that, what is your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And to see that if you have fallen from the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you're maintaining that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, examine yourself, examine your heart. He says, and see that in your heart, how much love do you have for Fatima Zahra salamu alayha? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says to the Prophet, tells your ummah, in kuntum tuhibbuna Allah fattabi'uni yuhibbukum Allah. That if you claim to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, follow the sunnah of Rasulullah. Follow that path of Rasulullah. And what was that sunnah and what was that path of Rasulullah with Fatima Zahra salamu alayha? That as soon as he saw Fatima, he would stand up, he would go and he would greet her. He would kiss her on her forehead. This was the love of Rasulullah for Fatima Zahra salamu alayha. So as that Arif, he stated, he says, that examine your heart. That what is your love for Fatima Zahra salamu alayha? He says, and if you see that you have that love for Fatima Zahra, he says, you know that you still have that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, but be careful, tread carefully. He says, because what will break that love between that you will have for Fatima Zahra, he says, our disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. that when we disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our connection, our, again, gaining ma'rifah, gaining understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Fatima Zahra becomes shaky. Becomes shaky. And I'll simply mention this so that, but if we read this, the Dua Tawassul, and this is Dua Tawassul Ghayru Ma'ruf. Not the one that we kind of normally recite, but Dua Tawassul Ghayru Ma'ruf, where we make tawassul with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salam, and in that tawassul, it kind of gives us a hint that, so with what quality or what thing do we seek from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Through the barakah of that ma'asum. And so in the very beginning, we make tawassul with Rasulullah, with Fatima Zahra, wa baniha, or bunayha, with Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. We make that tawassul all together. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the barakah of these individuals, to do what? To help us to remain within the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ala ta'at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as we obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we remove ourselves out of that love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We weaken our love for Fatima Zahra, salam alayha. And perhaps, yes, our only connection, or we may not elevate our love, because he also states, he says, and we should aim to make our love for Fatima stronger. Make our love for Fatima Zahra stronger. And when we do so, then our love for Rasulullah becomes stronger. Our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes stronger. Inshallah, our time is almost over. But in these days of Fatimiyya, as we mourn for Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha, we should also truly kind of connect to those things, that inheritance that Fatima Zahra she left behind for us, the khutbah fadakiyya. Not just read it, study it. The tasbih of Fatima Zahra. Not just recite it quickly, but really concentrate that. What is this tasbih of Fatima Zahra? That tasbih of Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha, that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, alayhi wassalam, he says that one who recites that tasbih and then immediately after that says, astaghfirullah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive that person. Qad ghufira. And truly, when we understand that maqam of Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha, then we truly understand the loss of Fatima Zahra. Part of that maqam, we'll just point to this before we go into the masa'ib, that Fatima Zahra, Sayyida Nisa al-Alameen, Fatima Zahra, the mother Ummul La'imma, Ma'asuma, infallible. That even within her seerah, they say that whenever she read the Quran, whenever she heard the Quran, it says, especially when it was something to do with Jahannam, that what will make a person go to Jahannam, that she would faint. This is someone who has no sin. We say she's ma'asuma. She hasn't sinned. But when she hears about Jahannam, she would faint out of awe for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the tarbiyah that Fatima Zahra she gives us, to connect to Allah. Fatima Zahra, salamu alayha, that on her deathbed, her wasiyah to Amir al-Mu'mineen, She was the teacher of the Quran. You saw her student Fidda, that after the Shahadat of Fatima, she spoke only with the Quran. You asked her anything, normal question, she spoke only with the Quran. But Fatima to Zahra, she said, Ya Abul Hassan, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, come to my grave and recite the Quran. Don't forget me, recite the Quran. That greatness of Fatima to Zahra was so great that even in one of the ruwayas, they say that when someone saw Amir al-Mu'mineen in the Battle of Siffin, this is like 50 years after the Shahadat of Fatima to Zahra. They said that they saw Amir al-Mu'mineen looking sad in the Battle of Siffin. They thought that it was because what was going on with the Ummah. He says, no. He says, I'm still mourning Fatima to Zahra. I'm still mourning Fatima to Zahra. And he was someone who never forgot that promise that he made to recite the Quran by the grave of Fatima to Zahra. Shortly after the burial of Fatima to Zahra, as he says, I return this amanah back to you, Ya Rasulullah. He said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, to fulfill that wasiyah, he went and he sat by the grave of Fatima to Zahra, reciting the Quran. And he was reciting for hours. At one point, Amir al-Mu'mineen, that he laid down beside the grave of Fatima to Zahra. And he slept there beside the grave of Fatima to Zahra. And in his dream, he saw Fatima to Zahra coming to him. He saw Fatima to Zahra, and she said to him, Ya Abul Hassan, إلى البيت. She said, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, yo Abul Hassan, return back home. That why was she telling him to return back home? She said, قد جلست زينب من النوم ونظرت إلى مكاني ووجدتها خالية. He said that Zainab, she is woken up from her sleep, that Amir al-Mu'mineen, while the children were sleeping at the home, he came to recite the Quran by the grave of Fatima to Zahra. But she says, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, return back home. Zainab says, woken up in the middle of the night. She's looking for me. She's looking to the spot that where I would sleep, and she's found this empty spot. So return back home, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, and comfort your daughter Zainab. Ya Fatima, tell me this, that if you had saw that what happened to Zainab in Karbala, that how she lost her family, how she lost Imam al-Hussein and her brother Abul Fadl Abbas, her nephew Ali Akbar, the other children, and how she lost them, the other menfolk, and Fatima and Zainab al-Kubra. She was alone in Karbala, trying to gather the women in Karbala, to gather the children in Karbala, trying to shield Imam Zayn al-Abidin in Karbala. That was a moment when she was alone as well. And there was no one there to comfort her because her brothers, they had been martyred in the plains of Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم بارك هذا المجلس الفاطمي، اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشفي مرضانا وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه وتحت لوائه بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين.
quick salam inshallah Sayyida Zahra. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا ابنة رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابنة نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابنة حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا ابنة خليل الله. السلام عليك يا ابنة صفي الله. السلام عليك يا ابنة أمين الله. السلام عليك يا ابنة خير خلق الله. السلام عليك يا ابنة أفضل أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته. السلام عليك يا ابنة خير الخلق خير البرية. السلام عليك يا سيدة نساء العالمين من الأولين والآخرين. السلام عليك يا زوجة ولي الله وخير الخلق بعد رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا آل بيت رسول الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
اللهم